The year is 1918. The echoes of gunfire and the thunder of artillery still reverberated across Europe. The world was already reeling, exhausted and scarred from the unprecedented devastation of the Great War. The relentless, daily toll of death had numbed entire nations, a grim acceptance settling over communities as they mourned their lost sons, fathers, and brothers. Life had become synonymous with loss, but as the guns began to fall silent, a new silent and far more insidious enemy was about to strike, emerging from the shadows to unleash a wave of devastation unlike anything seen before. It crept in quietly, not with bombs, but with a cough, a fever, and a sudden, suffocating weakness that left its victims gasping for air, their bodies rapidly succumbing to its unseen assault. This was not a war between nations, fueled by political ambitions and territorial disputes, but a war against humanity itself, a battle fought on a microscopic scale with devastating global consequences. The first cases were often dismissed as a common cold or a particularly bad bout of the seasonal flu. But this was different, far more virulent and deadly than anything anyone had encountered before. It struck with terrifying speed. Healthy young adults full of life and vitality could be dead within hours, leaving families and communities shattered in its wake. The virus upended the natural order, disrupting the very fabric of society and challenging long-held assumptions about health and mortality. Targeting those in their prime, soldiers returning home, factory workers fueling the economy, young parents raising families. Communities were paralyzed by fear as the invisible enemy spread relentlessly, leaving empty streets and a haunting silence in its path. Facing an enemy they could neither see nor understand, a microscopic terror that defied the logic of war and the understanding of medicine. Wartime censorship, still in effect in many countries, hid the true extent of the outbreak, suppressing information and downplaying the severity of the illness to maintain morale. But Spain's open reporting as a neutral nation led to the unfortunate misnomer, the Spanish flu, forever associating the country with the pandemic's devastation. In reality, the virus likely began elsewhere, its true origins shrouded in mystery and debate, lost to the fog of war and the limitations of early 20th century science. But the name stuck, a cruel twist of fate that unfairly burdened Spain with the stigma of the global catastrophe. As the pandemic, fueled by troop movements and global trade, relentlessly swept across borders, leaving no corner of the world untouched. The world, already mourning its war dead, grappling with unimaginable loss and widespread trauma, now faced a plague of unprecedented scale, a silent killer that threatened to finish what the war had started, pushing humanity to the brink of collapse. The emotional shock was profound. A collective sense of disbelief and despair washed over the globe as communities struggled to comprehend the magnitude of the crisis. How could something as familiar as the flu, a common ailment often dismissed as a minor inconvenience, suddenly transform into a global killer, capable of decimating entire populations? The pandemic would soon reveal, in the most brutal and unforgiving way, just how vulnerable even the strongest societies could be, exposing the fragility of human systems and the limitations of medical knowledge in the face of a novel and rapidly spreading disease. The world was ambushed, caught completely off guard by a threat it was ill-equipped to handle. Not by armies with their visible weapons and predictable strategies, but by a microscopic adversary, an invisible enemy that exploited the interconnectedness of the modern world to spread with terrifying efficiency. And no one was truly prepared for the scale and ferocity of the onslaught, leaving humanity to confront its vulnerability in the face of an unprecedented global health crisis. The year is 1918. The world is embroiled in the Great War, but an even more insidious enemy is about to emerge. The 1918 influenza, soon to be known as the Spanish flu, spread with unprecedented speed, riding the currents of war. The global conflict inadvertently fueled the pandemic's rapid dissemination. Troop ships and trains, the lifelines of the war effort, became unwitting vehicles for the virus, carrying it with ruthless efficiency from continent to continent. The interconnectedness of the world, once a symbol of progress, now facilitated a deadly exchange. The very networks built for war, designed to move troops and supplies, became highways for a global plague, turning bustling hubs into breeding grounds for disease. The virus, an H1N1 strain of avian origin, a microscopic enemy unseen and underestimated, was shockingly lethal, far exceeding the typical seasonal flu in its virulence. Symptoms began like any flu, a familiar cough, a slight fever, but quickly escalated, a terrifyingly rapid descent into severe illness. Lungs filled with fluid, suffocating its victims, skin turned blue from lack of oxygen, and death could come in hours, a swift and merciless end. The pandemic struck in waves, a mild spring, a deceptive calm before the storm, then a deadly autumn, a season of unprecedented loss and fear. The second wave swept across the world in weeks, a relentless tide of sickness, sparing no one, young or old, rich or poor. No demographic was immune. The flu traveled by every means: ship, across vast oceans, train, snaking through continents, foot, reaching even the most remote villages, penetrating the most isolated corners of the globe. Up to a third of the world's population was infected, a staggering number that highlights the sheer scale of the crisis. Tens of millions died, leaving behind a trail of grief and devastation. The death toll dwarfed that of the war itself, a grim testament to the virus's unparalleled lethality. In many places, society's basic functions collapsed, overwhelmed by the sheer number of sick and dying. Under the weight of the sick and dying, healthcare systems buckled, and resources were stretched to their breaking point. The world was fighting on two fronts, battling both human conflict and a microscopic invader. But the invisible enemy proved far more deadly, its impact far more widespread and devastating. The pandemic was a biological catastrophe, a stark reminder of humanity's vulnerability in the face of nature's power, killing more in a year than the Black Death did in a century, a truly unprecedented disaster. No corner of the earth was spared, from bustling cities to remote island communities. The virus left its mark. Humanity was under siege, facing a crisis that would reshape societies and leave an indelible scar on the 20th century. The pandemic changed daily life in ways both visible and haunting. Cities fell silent, broken only by the sound of ambulance bells and the ever-present cough. Fear turned neighbors into strangers. Even family homes became places of dread. The flu moved swiftly through households, turning acts of care into acts of risk. Children lost parents overnight, orphanages overflowed, and the trauma would linger for a lifetime. Community rituals, weddings, funerals, gatherings were forbidden. The dead were buried quickly, often without ceremony, compounding the grief. The social fabric frayed as fear and loss spread faster than the virus itself. The world became a place of whispers and averted gazes. The emotional toll was immense, a quiet agony in millions of homes. The pandemic left scars that would never fully heal. The Spanish flu's true devastation was measured in families destroyed. Entire households vanished in days, leaving empty chairs and shattered futures. Widows, orphans, and parents who lost all their children became the new face of grief. Orphanages overflowed, and children bore the double burden of loss and stigma. The economic blow was severe. Families plunged into poverty, women forced into unfamiliar work. The pandemic redrew the social and economic map, not with grand events, but with millions of private tragedies. Each loss was personal, each empty chair a monument to a life erased. The world's future was rewritten, one family at a time. As the deadly second wave hit with a vengeance, its impact was far more devastating than the first. Hospitals overflowed, and the healthcare system teetered on the brink of collapse. Cities scrambled to respond with the limited tools they had at their disposal. Emergency meetings were convened, and officials worked tirelessly to coordinate a response, often facing immense pressure and uncertainty. Quarantines, isolating the sick to prevent further spread, lockdowns, confining people to their homes, and closures of schools, theaters, and other public spaces became widespread, fundamentally altering daily life. These drastic measures became the new normal, a stark contrast to the world people once knew. Mask mandates were strictly enforced, becoming a common sight in public, and mask slackers who refused to comply faced fines or even jail time, highlighting the seriousness of the situation. Streets were regularly disinfected in an attempt to kill the virus, spitting was outlawed to prevent the spread of germs, and public health posters urged people to adopt new habits of hygiene and social distancing. The economic cost of the pandemic was crushing. Businesses shuttered their doors, many never to reopen, jobs vanished, leaving countless people unemployed and struggling, and families struggled to survive, facing poverty and hunger. The tension between saving lives, prioritizing public health, and saving livelihoods, keeping the economy afloat, was ever present, a constant balancing act. Public health campaigns tried to educate and unite the population, promoting preventative measures, But fear, misinformation, and resistance to public health measures persisted, creating division and distrust. Life became a daily struggle for many, filled with uncertainty and hardship. The vibrant pulse of cities, once bustling with activity, was replaced by an atmosphere of anxiety and suspicion, as people feared contact with one another. For many, these unprecedented measures were the only hope against an invisible killer, a desperate attempt to regain control. The world was forced to adapt to a new reality, improvising solutions in the face of the unknown and unprecedented challenges. The fight for survival was desperate and relentless, and the outcome remained uncertain, casting a long shadow of doubt over the future. Every day was a test of endurance, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. Hospitals, meant to heal, became overwhelmed battlegrounds. Makeshift wards filled schools and armories, cots lined every hallway. With doctors and nurses at war, students and volunteers filled the gaps, learning as they went. Nurses cared for dozens at a time, often until they themselves fell ill. The main task was comfort, not cure. Medicine was powerless. Desperation led to every remedy imaginable, but nothing worked. The psychological toll on caregivers was immense. They faced death daily, often feeling helpless. Staff shortages extended to every role, from orderlies to morticians. Bodies piled up, awaiting burial. The system for caring for the sick and dead collapsed. Hospitals became places of despair, not hope. The infrastructure of care crumbled under the weight of the pandemic. The healers were overwhelmed and the world was sinking. Amid the darkness, acts of courage and kindness shone through. Neighbors left food for the sick, volunteers risked their lives to care for strangers. Telephone operators became lifelines, connecting families and dispatching help. Community groups, Red Cross, churches, teachers, mobilized to sew masks, run kitchens, and staff emergency hospitals. Teachers became nurses, women drove supplies, and ordinary people stepped up. These small acts of solidarity brought hope and connection in a time of isolation. Stories of individual bravery, doctors, nurses, even police, became the quiet legacy of the pandemic. In crisis, the best of humanity endured. Even as fear spread, so did compassion. When the pandemic finally receded, the world was transformed. A missing generation left deep demographic scars, orphans, widows, and lost futures. The trauma lingered, shaping a generation's outlook and fueling the wild energy of the Roaring '20s. The failure to control the flu spurred new investments in public health and the creation of international health organizations. Yet, the pandemic quickly faded from public memory, overshadowed by war and economic recovery. Families rarely spoke of it. The world chose to forget. The Spanish flu became a ghost in history, its lessons nearly lost. But its impact was everywhere, in policy, in culture, in the silent grief of survivors. The world had changed, even if it tried not to remember why. The scars remained, hidden but deep. A century later, the story of 1918 is a warning and a guide. The Spanish flu showed how quickly a new virus can upend the world. Pandemics test not just health systems, but the fabric of society itself. Clear, honest communication is vital. Censorship and secrecy only breed fear. Trust between governments and people can save lives. Pandemics expose inequalities and force us to choose between individual freedom and the common good. The greatest defense is solidarity. Compassion, collaboration, and care for the vulnerable. The legacy of 1918 is resilience. Humanity endured, rebuilt, and moved forward. But we must remember and prepare. The ghosts of 1918 remind us. Unity, preparedness, and memory are our greatest strengths.